The dog stopped on the gravel and would not go past the mailbox. That was the first thing, and Wade Sorensen noticed it, the way he noticed a loose lug nut by the feel through the wheel, before he had a word for what was wrong. He was 46 years old, and he had walked that quarter-mile of driveway, in the dark, maybe 4,000 times, and the dog had walked it with him for 9 of those years, and the dog had never once stopped at the mailbox. It sat down on its haunches in the frost and looked at the birches across the road, and a low sound came out of it that was not a growl and was not a whine. And Wade stood there with the thermos in his hand and the truck still ticking behind him, and felt the cold come up through his boots. He told the dog to come. The dog did not come. He said it again, the same flat way. He said everything, and the animal got up and turned a half circle and pressed itself against the back of his knee. And then it would not leave that spot, would not look anywhere but the trees. Wade looked where the dog looked. The birch flats ran north from the road for the better part of a mile. White trunks standing close in the dark like a field of bones, the leaves long down and the ground between them open and gray, and there was nothing there. He looked a long time. He let his eyes go soft the way you do when you are trying to catch movement at the edge of a flashlight beam, and he held his breath to listen, and the listening was the thing that bothered him because there was nothing to hear. No wind in the high branches, no small stir of mouse or junco in the leaf litter. The flats had gone flat in the ear as well as the eye, a held silence with a shape to it, the particular quiet of a room where someone has just stopped talking. There was nothing there that he could see. He marked the time on the truck clock when he climbed back in. It was 5:42 in the morning, the second week of October, and that was the last ordinary morning he would get. Wade ran the pumps and the wells for the township and 3 of the small lake associations north of Cass Lake, and a man who keeps water moving through a country of frost heave and iron-stained ground learns to trust what his hands and his gauges tell him over what anybody says. He had a route, and the route did not change, and that was the point of it. Tuesdays and Fridays he ran the lake associations, the Andersons and the Knutsons and the cluster of cabins out on the Beltrami line, and Mondays and Thursdays the township wells, and Wednesday he did the chlorinator sheds the county had put in after the Giardia scare. The little fiberglass boxes humming on their slabs, with the day tanks bubbling inside them. He checked pressure tanks and well houses, and the wiring on the well pit heaters that kept the casings from freezing solid in January, and he carried a clipboard with the numbers on it that he wrote in a carpenter pencil. Because ink froze in his shirt pocket on a cold morning, the numbers told him everything. A pressure tank that should sit at 40 and sat at 32 had a story in it. A waterlogged bladder or a foot valve gone or a slow leak somewhere in a buried line, and Wade could read the story off the gauge the way some men read weather off the sky. He did not exaggerate. When a neighbor said a pump was making a terrible racket, Wade would put his ear to the casing and lay 2 fingers flat against the steel to feel the bearing through the housing, and he would say it was a worn coupling, and he would be right, and he would not call it terrible, because terrible was a word for things that had not yet been measured. He had a wife named Rachel and a daughter named Posy, who was 19 months old and slept in the small back bedroom of the house at the end of the Birch Flats Road, and he had built the railing on her crib himself out of red oak. The house sat where the flats met a low cedar swamp, the last place on the road, 400 yards past the Lindgren place, which had been empty since old Carl Lindgren went into the home in Bemidji. Wade liked the isolation the way he liked a clean gauge. There were no surprises in it. He knew the sounds of that ground at every hour. He knew the way the swamp held the cold and the way sound carried flat across the flats in the fall when the leaves were down, and he knew that at 5:42 in the morning, the woods should have been full of small noise, the chickadees starting a red squirrel somewhere, the wind moving dry birch leaves. That morning there had been none of it. He had not put the pieces together, standing at the mailbox. He put them together later, the way you find the crack after the part has already failed, and he hated that, because pattern was the thing that kept a careful man ahead of trouble, and the pattern had been there, and he had missed it. The dog's name was Tuck. He was a yellow mongrel with some shepherd in him and a bad left hip, and he had a courage problem only in the sense that he had too much of it. Tuck had treed a black bear twice, once holding it up a jack pine for 40 minutes while Wade walked in, and he had stood his ground on a bull moose in the rut down at the swamp landing, which is a thing a smart dog does not do, planting himself stiff-legged in the trail with his lips peeled back while the moose stamped and swung its rack. And Wade had had to carry him home both times, the dog still shaking with the joy of the thing, still trying to look back over Wade's shoulder at the country he had won. He slept hard. He ate anything. He had never in 9 years backed off a sound in the dark, not a coyote chorus, not a bear in the trash, not the loon scream that put the hair up on summer visitors. So when Tuck would not pass the mailbox and would not bark at the wall, Wade filed it the way he filed a gauge, reading that did not fit the rest of the panel. He did not know yet what he was filing it against. A man who reads gauges learns to keep a number even when he does not yet have a use for it, because the use comes later, and it always comes, and it is always worse than the not knowing was. The first week he found the tracks. He was walking the swamp edge below the house with a soil probe looking for the spring that fed the Andersons' shallow well, and he came on a line of prints in the black muck at the cedar line that stopped him the way a wrong gauge reading stopped him. He crouched. He had read tracks his whole life, deer and bear and wolf and the occasional cougar that the state said were not there. These were not any of those. The print was long, longer than his own boot, and it was pressed deep at the front and light at the heel, the weight forward, and there were 4 toes that splayed in soft ground, and a 5th set higher and inward that did not always touch. He put his hand flat beside the clearest one, and his fingers did not span it. He took out the carpenter pencil and the clipboard, and he wrote the measurement down, 11¼ inches from heel to the front of the longest toe, and the stride, when he followed it, was a thing he wrote down twice, because he did not believe it the first time. The prints walked the swamp edge for 40 yards, and then they turned toward the house, and then they stopped at a stand of cedar, where the ground went hard, and he could not find where they went after that. He told himself bear. A bear walking flat-footed on soft ground will leave a long print, and the toes can splay, and a big boar can run a stride like that downhill. He stood in the cedar and built the bear in his mind the way you build the rational thing, board by board. And he had it almost finished when he looked back at the line of prints and saw that they did not rock heel to toe the way a bear walks. They came down forward and pushed off forward, every one of them, the way a man walks when he is carrying something heavy and leaning into a hill, except the ground was flat. He stood there a while. Then he photographed the clearest print with his phone, and he hated how the phone made it look small and ordinary. A smudge in mud that could be anything. A thing you would scroll past, and he set a flag stake beside it from the bundle he carried for marking lines, and he went home and did not tell Rachel. Because he did not yet have a thing to tell her that he could defend, Rachel knew anyway, the way she knew when a gauge was off by the set of his shoulders. She was at the stove when he came in, and she looked at his boots, which were black to the ankle with swamp muck, and she said the spring give you trouble, and he said something like that, and she let it go because they had an arrangement about letting things go until he had them sorted. Posy was in the high chair smearing oatmeal into her hair, and Wade washed his hands a long time, and then he picked his daughter up and held her and felt her small heartbeat going fast and steady like a bird's, and over her shoulder he looked out the kitchen window at the birch flats and the white trunks standing in the gray light. And, for the first time in his life, that view did not look empty to him. It looked occupied. He could not have told you by what. He put Posy back in the chair, and he went out and checked the latch on the storm door twice. And he could not have told you why he did that either. The dispatch line for the county was a number he had called maybe 3 times in 20 years, for a downed line once, and a drowning he came on at the public landing and would not talk about. He called it the second week, after the second set of tracks, the ones that came up onto the gravel of the driveway itself and circled the propane tank and stood by the depth of them for a long time at the corner of the house nearest the back bedroom. The woman who answered was kind and tired. He said he had an animal coming around the property, a big one, leaving sign he could not account for. Near the house. Near his kid, she asked if it had threatened anyone. She asked if it was a bear, and he said he did not think so. And she said the bears were moving now before the den up, and gave him the number for the DNR Wildlife Office in Grand Rapids, and said to call them in the morning. They were closed now. He thanked her because it was not her fault. He stood in the kitchen with the phone in his hand after she hung up, and he understood, in a flat and final way, that no system built for ordinary trouble was going to come down that road. He was the system now. He had been the system the whole time and had only just been told. The DNR man called him back 2 days later, and was decent about it, and clearly thought he was dealing with a spooked first-timer, which Wade let stand, because the alternative was to argue, and he had nothing to argue with but a smudge on his phone and a number on a clipboard. The man said wolf, then said the splay sounded like a dog, a big loose St. Bernard cross, maybe somebody's farm dog. Gone feral, there were a few of those around. Wade said the stride was over 6 feet. The man was quiet a second, and then said, tape measures stretch and snow exaggerates. And it was not snow, but Wade did not correct him. He thanked him and hung up and went out to the well house at the Knutson place, and ran his route. And the whole day he carried the thing the DNR man had said the way you carry a wrong torque spec, knowing it would not hold and waiting for the part to fail. The nights got longer, the way October nights do. The wrongness moved indoors by degree. Tuck would not sleep in the mud room anymore. He had slept in the mud room on his cedar bed for 9 years by the boots where the heat came up off the floor. Register, and now he would not go in there at all, would stand in the kitchen doorway with his ears back if Wade tried to lead him to it. He took to standing at the back door with his hackles up at hours. Wade could set a watch by 2:15, 3:15, his whole body gone rigid and pointed at the wall nearest Posy's room, and he did not bark, which was the part Wade could not get past. A dog that had stood down a bull moose stood at that wall and shook, the shaking running down his bad hip, so his back leg trembled and made the small sound he had made at the mailbox, low in the chest, and would not bark, because barking is what you do at a thing you think you can drive off, and Tuck had stopped thinking he could drive this off. He had moved on to the older arithmetic, the one Prey does, the one about staying small and staying still. Wade started sitting up. He would put Tuck on the rug by the back bedroom door and carry the kitchen chair back to the wall and sit with the deer rifle across his knees. The old lever point, 30-30 his father had left him. Not because he meant to use it, but because holding it was a thing a man could do with his hands in the dark. And he would listen to the flats and learn them. The way he had learned a gauge panel, one needle at a time. The sounds started small. A branch coming down where no branch should fall. On a still night. once, then 10 minutes later again, in a different place, which is not how branches fall. A heavy step in the leaf litter, a single one, deliberate. The pause after it longer than the step. He learned the geography of the thing by ear over a week of nights, the way it would come up the swamp edge, and then hold at the cedar, where the tracks had stopped, and then come no closer. He marked the times on the clipboard with the carpenter pencil, because that was the thing he knew how to do. 2:14, 2:31, 2:52. He repeated the numbers to himself like bolts in a checklist, torquing them down in order. Because the order was the only thing he had that the dark could not take from him. And the order did not help, and he kept it anyway. The smell came before he ever saw anything. He had the back door cracked an inch one night to hear better, the rifle across his knees, tuck a coiled spring on the rug, and the air that came in over the threshold was wrong in a way that made the hair stand on his arms before his mind caught up. It was musk and wet dog and something under that, a carrion sweetness, the smell of a deer, 3 days dead in August. And it came in on no wind at all, which meant the thing carrying it was close enough that its own warmth moved the air. Wade did not move. He had hunted enough to know that you are not the hunter in some moments, that there is a stillness that comes over a prey animal that is older than thought. And it came over him then, sitting in his own kitchen chair in his own house, and he understood with a cold clarity that he had crossed into being the smaller thing in the dark. He closed the door. He did it slowly, with 2 fingers, and he slid the bolt. And the bolt was a joke, and he knew it was a joke, and he slid it anyway. Through the small window in the door he saw nothing. The yard gray under the half-moon, the propane tank, the birches beyond. And then a section of the birches that should have been 3 trunks was 2 trunks, because something stood between them and against them, at a height that did not make sense, and it was not moving. And the longer he looked, the more certain he became that it was looking back, and that it was in no hurry, and that it had all night. He stood at the window with his heart going, and did the only useful thing he could think to do, which was to fix the height of it against the trunks he knew. The 3rd birch from the dead one, the fork at 9 feet he had pruned himself, and the top of the shape was above the fork. He wrote it down later. Above 9 feet. He looked at the number on the clipboard in the morning light, and it did not look like a number a sane man wrote. And he had written it, and he was sane. He did not sleep after that. He moved Posy's crib into their room, told Rachel it was the draft from the back wall. And she looked at him for a long moment and helped him carry it without a word, which told him she had stopped pretending too. They lay in the dark with the baby between them and the rifle along the wall and the house quiet, and Rachel said into the dark, in the flat way she had learned from him over 14 years, "You want to tell me what's out there?" And Wade said he did not know which was the truth. And she said, "But it's real." And he said, "Yes." And she was quiet a while, and then she said, "Okay." And that one word was the bravest thing he ever heard a person say, because it was a woman deciding to stand in a true thing instead of a comfortable lie. And they both heard the lie they had been living go quiet and stop. In the morning, he set the trail camera. He had bought it years back for the deer and never trusted it, a cheap thing that hung on a strap and took a flash picture when something moved across its eye. And he strapped it to the dead birch facing the cedar line where the thing held its station. And he checked the batteries twice, and he set it and he walked back to the house feeling for the first time in a week like he had done something a careful man does. He had set a gauge on the dark. He would have a reading. That was the thing he told himself, and it was almost enough to let him close his eyes for an hour. After Rachel got up with Posey and he lay there in the gray light thinking he had finally gotten ahead of it. And that was the night it came up onto the porch. He knew the porch boards. He had laid them. There was one near the door, the third from the step, that knocked against its joist when weight came on it because he had never gotten around to shimming it, a small domestic failure he had meant to fix for 2 years. At 3:09 in the morning, the third board knocked. Once. The specific dull note of it, the note he heard a dozen times a day under his own boots and Rachel's, and the soft slap of Posey's bare feet sounded in the dark with something else's weight on it. And Wade was out of the bed and at the wall of the bedroom with the rifle before he had finished waking. A foot of pine board and tar paper and nothing else. Something stood on his porch and breathed. He could hear it breathe. It was a big, slow sound with a catch in it, an animal sound, and under it, when it shifted, there was the other sound, the one he would never afterward have words enough for. A low rumble that sat below hearing and was felt in the chest more than heard, like a thing built wrong on purpose. Rachel had Posey off the bed, and in the corner, behind the dresser without a sound, the breathing moved along the wall toward the window. Wade moved with it on his side of the wall, the rifle up now, and at the window the thing stopped. And Wade stood 3 feet from it, with the glass and the dark between them, and neither of them moved for what the clock later told him was 11 minutes, and in all that time, it did not try the window, did not strike the glass, did not do any of the things a wild animal does. It waited. It was, he understood, taking the measure of the house, learning where they had moved, and the understanding that it could learn was worse than any tooth or claw, because a thing that learns is a thing that comes back knowing more. It left before dawn the way it always left. No sound of going, just an absence where the presence had been. And when the light came up gray over the flats, Wade went out onto the porch in his sock feet with the rifle and stood in the cold and looked at the boards. There was a smear of mud at the third board and a long scrape in the frost, on the railing and on the windowsill outside Posey's old room. 4 parallel grooves in the soft cedar of the frame, evenly spaced, drawn down slow. Not the frantic scratch of a coon or a cat, but 4 lines pulled deliberately through the wood, at a height even with his own collarbone. He measured the spacing with the carpenter pencil laid across them. He measured the height. He stood there in the cold doing the arithmetic of a thing that had hands enough to space 4 claws like fingers and reach to the height of a standing man and the patience to draw them down slow. And the arithmetic came out to nothing he could name. He remembered the camera. He went to the dead birch in the gray light almost running, and the camera was there, and it was turned. Not torn down, not broken. Turned on its strap to face the trunk. The lens an inch from the bark, the way you would turn a man's face to the wall. He stood looking at it a long time before he took it down. He told himself a branch could have done it, a deer brushing the strap, and the explanation tried to stand and could not. Because a branch does not turn a lens to face a tree, at the exact moment a lens is the one thing in the dark. And he discarded the explanation in the same breath he offered it and stood there holding a camera that had been blinded on purpose. He pulled the card anyway. There were 41 pictures on it. 40 of them were the cedar line empty, triggered by nothing he could see, time-stamped through the night at intervals that walked closer to the house. The 41st was a wall of dark too close to focus, a shape that filled the frame and gave up nothing. A curve that might have been a shoulder, and a pale smear high in the corner that he looked at for a long time before he understood he was looking at the underside of a jaw. And the picture ended at the bottom edge where the lens had been turned to the bark, as if the thing had let one frame be taken and then reached up and closed the eye that took it. He called the DNR man back and got a machine and left a message that he tried to keep flat and heard himself fail at, and the man did not call back that day or the next. He drove into town and showed the trail cam picture to Lyle Turvo at the hardware, who had trapped that country for 50 years and had a wall of skulls in his back room to prove it. Beaver? And Fisher? And Wolf? Lyle took the phone in his thick hands and held it out at arm's length and then drew it close, his reading glasses down his nose, and he was quiet a long time. Longer than the picture deserved, if the picture was nothing. And he did not make a joke, which from Lyle was a kind of alarm in itself, because Lyle made a joke at funerals. He set the phone down on the glass counter over the fishing tackle, and he took his glasses off and folded them, and he said after a while that he had heard a thing 2 falls back from a man cutting firewood off the Suomi road. The thing the man had told him with the bark still on it, and then would not repeat once he was sober and had thought about how it sounded. Lyle said he had not believed the man. He said it the way you say a thing you have been telling yourself for 2 years. Then he looked out the front window at the gray street for a moment and he said, quieter, that he still did not believe it. And the not believing had gone hollow in his mouth. He told Wade to keep his dog close and his lights on and his gun loaded, and to think hard about taking his family down to Rachel's sister's in Brainerd for a while, just till the snow came and the country went quiet. Here. And under the advice, Wade heard the thing Lyle would not say out loud, which was that there was nothing in 50 years of skulls in that back room that matched what was on the card, and that a man who has named every animal in a country his whole life does not sleep well the night he meets one he cannot name. That was the counsel he got. A trapper's silence and a hardware store full of things that could be named, and the one thing that mattered had no name and would get none. He drove home in the early dark with his headlights pushing a small cone into a country that had gotten very large around him, and the birch flats came up white in the beams as he turned in, and he slowed without meaning to. And there at the edge of the light where the driveway met the road, his headlights caught 2 points of amber that hung above the brush at a height that no deer's eyes hang steady, not the startled flare of an animal caught crossing. And the eyes did not run and did not blink and were gone between one breath and the next. Not in the way a thing runs, but in the way a thing steps back into a dark it owns. Wade sat in the truck in his own driveway with the engine running and his hands on the wheel and made himself breathe, and then he drove the last 400 yards to his house with his jaw set, because his wife and his daughter were inside it and there was no other road. He did not sleep in a bed again that fall. He sat up in the kitchen with the chair against the wall that gave him the back bedroom and the porch and a slice of the yard, and he kept the yard light on, and the thing came anyway, every 3rd or 4th night, never the same approach twice, and he understood that it was reading him the way he read it, learning his watches, testing the gaps. It came up the swamp side when he was watching the road. It crossed the open yard on a moonless night when he had let himself trust the dark would keep it back. Twice he heard it on the roof, a weight moving over the shingles above Posey's old empty room, with a care that no animal that size should have been able to manage. The slow placement of feet that did not want to be heard and were heard only because the man below them had stopped sleeping in order to hear them. He stopped trying to explain it to himself in the night. The explanations were for daylight, and they did not survive the dark, and he quit spending them. What he did instead was count. He counted the seconds of the breathing. He counted the steps across the roof. He laid the numbers in rows on the clipboard and torqued them down, and they held nothing back. And he kept them, because the keeping was the last of his competence and he would not give it up. Rachel did not take Posey to Brainerd. They talked about it in the gray hours with the baby asleep in the laundry basket they had taken to keeping at their feet. And Rachel said if she took Posey and left him there alone, she would be leaving him to it, and she would not. because the truth he could not say was that he did not believe distance would help. A thing that learned a house could learn a road. He had stopped believing there was an edge to the country it could not cross, so they stayed, the three of them and the dog, in the last house on the Birch Flats road. And they got hard, the way people get hard. And the warmth that had been in that kitchen, the oatmeal mornings, and the dry jokes, and the small slap of bare feet on the boards, all of it pulled back to